Hello and welcome everyone to the 12th episode of our weekly podcast, India Colonized, where we discuss legends and stories from our colonial past. I'm your host, Umar Haq, and today we are talking about the forgotten pioneer of Indian cinemas, Hiralal Sen. A man who fought for his passions and pure love of filmography only to have to meet his tragic end. Unfortunately, nothing from his work survives today, so we explore him with whatever we have left of him. Hiralal Sen was born in 1866 to a successful lawyer in Bhojpuri village, Manikganj, approximately 80 kilometers from the capital of current day Bangladesh, Dhaka. His father, Chandra Mohan Sen, was a reputed lawyer in the Kolkata High Court. Although Hiralal was the successor of his zamindar family, he was someone who was always found of passion for science and photography in particular. His cousin Dinesh Chandra Sen, who later became a renowned folklore researcher, taught him a lot about art and culture. While growing up in Calcutta as a student, Hiralal started practicing photography. In 1890, he established a photography studio of his own by the name H.L. Sen and Brothers. Within a short time, his expertise in photography was very popular across Calcutta. In July of 1896, the first film screening in India was held at the Watson Hotel in Bombay by the Luminaire brothers. Many days after that film screening took place in Calcutta, Professor Stevenson and Father LeFew were two people who had come to Calcutta to screen films at the Star Theatre. We hope to cover more on these events in future episodes. Here, Hiralal was enjoying the films along with his younger brother, Motilal Sen. There are many narratives that go about the approach of the two siblings to Stevens to learn more about films. One of the narratives goes that apparently Stephen refused when Hiralal approached him, as he thought that he might become his business rival. However, we have also found conflicting reports which say that Hiralal was also supported by Stevenson and that he gave him his first camera to shoot his first film. A very keen Hiralal learnt about films by reading journals and newspapers. He later borrowed 5,000 takas from his mother and bought some equipment for projection. In 1898, he established the Royal Bioscope Company to screen films. Of the people who supported him the most were his brothers Motilal and Devakilal Sen and his nephew Kumar Shankar Gupta. On the 4th of April 1898, they arranged for the first film screening in their company. The Royal Bioscope Company was the first film production company in Bengal and possibly the first in India. The initial production used an urban bioscope, which was bought from Warwick Trading Company in London. You could have a look at the urban bioscope in the title image of the podcast. The company here produced shows generally exhibited at the Classic Theatre in Calcutta, where films were featured in intervals of stage shows. When Hiralal began producing his own films regularly, they were chiefly scenes from stage productions of the Classic Theatre. However, as newer film ventures entered the marketplace, Royal Bioscope's fortune began to decline, and by 1913, the production had ceased. But over this period, Hiralal became a filmmaker and also a distributor. In 1900, he imported a few more pieces of equipment for filmmaking, and he communicated with the renowned theatre activist Amendranath Datta. Amendranath Datta was the owner of Classic Theatre. Sitaram, which made him the first ever Bengali filmmaker, was the first movie that was produced by Hira Lal, who took snaps of the classic theatre production. Throughout his career, Hira Lal Sen made around 40 films, 12 feature films, 10 documentary films, and 3 advertisements. Most of the films he made were scenes which were depicted from theatrical production played at Amendranath Datta's classic theatre. During those times, raw films were usually imported into the country. In 1901 and 1904, he produced many films for classic theatre, which included Bharmar, Hariraj, and Buddhadev. His longest-running film, which was produced in 1903, was titled Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, which ran for approximately around 22 minutes. It was also based on the original classic theatre performance. However, not a lot is known about these feature films since they were never screened, and many of them, or rather most of them, never really survived. Hira Lal was known to be the first Indian to have used film for advertising purposes. He was known for having made 2 films advertising for Jabba Kusum hair oil and Edwards tonic. He is someone who is associated with having created the first political film. This was done while he was documenting the anti-partition demonstration and Swadeshi movement against Lord Curzon's decision to partition Bengal, and he did so while placing his camera and equipment atop the town hall in Calcutta on the 22nd of September. In 1913, Royal Bioscope made its last film. Hira Lal was someone who was of a calm and composed nature, and many people thought of this to reflect him being a coward. However, he was someone who was excellent at his studies, and he loved to swim. An early childhood experiment which Hira Lal and Dinesh Chandra performed gives us a glimpse of what was in store for their future years. Their playing with shadows. Hira Lal and Dinesh Chandra made some paper models of Ram, Sita, and Dasharatha from the Ramayana. The paper crafts were tied to the string and hung between the walls. In the evening, after there was darkness, a wet cloth was placed on the opposite wall and lighting was arranged through a lantern behind the models. This resulted in a large shadow of the models. To and fro motions of the lantern and moving the strings connected to the models resulted in a sort of magic of shadows. Apart from his elementary learning, Hira Lal Sen was someone who was well versed with Persian. During his stint in Jagannath Collegiate School, he got interested in photography. He made a darkroom for himself in his own house and experimented with the form. Hira Lal was later awarded a gold medal in a photography competition organized by Bourne and Shepherd. Later, Hira Lal got admitted to Duff College but could not continue with his degree. He started practicing photography instead, much more seriously, and he turned it into his profession. A panorama of Indian scenes in possession, anti-partition demonstration and Swadeshi movement, holy bathing in the Kumbh are some of the movies or films that Hira Lal produced spanning from 1898 all the way till 1913. Hira Lal's later years were marked with disappointment and economic hardship. A rival, Jamshed Premji Madan of Elstone Bioscope Company, had long surpassed him in the term of success. We also plan on covering his life and works soon. At this point, Hira Lal was also suffering from cancer. Not all was going well in his life. A few days before his death in October 1970, a devastating incident shook him. A fire had broken out, destroying every film he had ever made. Not a lot is known about him, and it's not definitely someone who is remembered and celebrated. Hiralal Sen was someone who was prolific and enthusiastic when it came to experimenting with the new medium, which was called cinema. His achievements are not open to scrutiny as none of his films survived. His bankruptcy in 1913, followed by the devastating fire that destroyed everything in 1917, drew a curtain to all his exploits. Whatever evidence remains suggests that Hiralal was making several genres from the very beginning. Many people have been attributed for having been the pioneers in the field of Indian cinema. Among these people are Dhundiraj Govind Phalke, also known as Dada Saheb Phalke, who was considered to be the father of Indian cinema. He became popular through his film Raja Harishchandra. Alamara was the first motion picture with sound, which was directed by Ardeshir Irani, released in 1914. These are some popular pioneers when it comes to the history of Indian cinema. However, these people are known and celebrated because their works survived and they passed through generations. This was not a fortune for Hiralal Sen, as all of his works were burnt away by the fire, and none of his works remain for us to scrutinize them, let alone for him to be remembered and celebrated. A lot of cinema was produced during the time of the British Raj, with very complex stories and plots following in and around them. Hiralal Sen's tryst with films is a story that is not widely shared or known among people when it comes to the history of Indian cinema. However, had his work survived and had his venture of Royal Bioscope Company lived on, our understanding of the legacy of the pioneers of Indian cinema would have been different. However, given that his films were destroyed in a fire and that not much remains of his work, it is hard for us to understand a man as complex as him and to get any resources to imagine how life would have been for a film director, producer, and a photographer at the ending of 19th century and the dawn of 20th century. It is difficult for us to imagine how he battled his economic hardships and health issues, and eventually all his efforts were lost, and nothing of him or his legacy remains today. That brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. We hope you liked it, and we hope to bring you more such exciting stories and legends every week. We now also have our own website, www.indiacolonized.com. That's colonized with an S, where you can read and share our articles and podcast scripts about India's rich colonial past. If you like what you cover and find interesting, please subscribe or follow our podcast wherever you are listening from. Don't forget to like and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow us on @India Colonized. Again, colonized with an S. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious.